previous 46 calls, it didn't seem to be a hoodie that triggered his response that there was something wrong.
That's right.
But in 6 of those calls that have been released, he did seem to find a black guy walking through his neighborhood alone.
Right.
I mean,
obviously,
that out there.
an incredibly ridiculous comment.
They weren't all in hoodies, I'm assuming.
Right.
Julian, I want to bring you in here. We shift gears a little bit because, you know, we're learning more and more about the involvement of Alec, the NRA, the Koch brothers in crafting these laws, or sort of crafting draft versions of these laws that we're now seeing pass through Republican-controlled states.
They weren't all in hoodies, I'm assuming.
Right.
Julian, I want to bring you in here. We shift gears a little bit because, you know, we're learning more and more about the involvement of Alec, the NRA, the Koch brothers in crafting these laws, or sort of crafting draft versions of these laws that we're now seeing pass through Republican-controlled state legislatures and Republican governors. Were you surprised to hear that those groups were involved?
Now, why are you going to be investigating this case? I think there needs to be a lot more investigation into what other laws the Koch brothers have, per se, ghost written, or rough drafts, or they had their lawyers write up and hand it over to their state representatives to floor as bills that were voted in. Koch brothers are notorious. There's one called Exposing the Koch brothers, a documentary about the amount of poisons that their factories are letting out into streams and stuff, and into the environment. And the people that live in these areas are, for almost entirely, lower income Americans, mostly black Americans in poor, rural areas where they lit these poisons, and the people that live in these areas are ending up with cancers, disease, dying at young ages. And also look at the amount of monies the Koch brothers have been funding nationwide Republican campaigns. Michelle Bachmann received thousands of dollars. Michelle Bachmann and her fake ass smile. And that's not where our country needs to go. Thank you. Her fake smile. My husband hates no gay people should be allowed to exist. Well, she didn't say that, but and her fake smile. And she received thousands of dollars campaign. It's shown in Koch brothers Exposed. And they're basically, I believe they're pushing these laws, a lot of them, to undermine poor people, to silence their vote, to silence their ability to unite or form groups legislatively to protect themselves from the poisons, to keep the EPA at bay. And the EPA would be much more want to go after a tree falling on a property that someone's going to build a house and some water backs up on the yard, and then they come in and say, oh, that's a wetlands, you can't build your house here. Instead of going after the factories that are poisoning whole communities. It's sickening.
No, I had very personal experience with it in 1999 and 2000 after the Columbine shootings, when the same group wanted to fight basic background checks for people buying guns at gun shows. And look, these are terrible laws, as was pointed out. They encourage shootouts. They encourage conflict when conflict avoidance makes sense. But I think as bad as these laws are, I still think you're likely to see Zimmerman arrested, because even under the Florida statute, it requires that Zimmerman would have had to have been attacked and that he would have had to have been facing grave danger. Now, we know from the facts, even though some of the facts are sketchy, we know pretty convincingly that Zimmerman was the pursuer in this case.
We need to look more into other laws as well.
He continued
this definitely needs to be followed up, without question. He needs to,
grave bodily harm is very,
most people's opinion. I believe. I received the petition. I didn't sign it right away. I wanted to learn more. And I've learned a lot more. And I believe he needs to stand trial.
Possibility of the federal government getting more involved.
Basically, it's a double standard. Let's say the black kid had killed the guy.
There's racial animus.
And
give cause to
make it opposite. They said, "Oh no, you weren't threatened with bodily harm.
It allows for
you had a gun. You could have avoided that, and they would have arrested him. But when the white guy killed the black guy, oh, you were threatened with bodily harm, so you're under the law. It creates a double standard."
Resigning or temporarily resigning, which I don't understand the temporary part. I think that's the beginning of the problems for this police department, because as you know, they've had problems in the past, but under the sister statute to 241, 242 allows for the federal government to investigate whether the local police department had some racial animus. The fact of the matter that the police department not only failed to arrest Zimmerman when all of the evidence shows right now that he should at a minimum be released. He can make the stand your ground defense in a court of law, but all the evidence shows that he should be arrested for murder. But the fact that the police also administered a blood test only to Trayvon Martin and not to Zimmerman really betrays, I think, a very, very questionable bias on the part of the police department. So I think it's not only me resigning, but I think the possibility of an investigation as well.
I'm going to stop you there because I want to come back to Dr. Dead.
And I would not be surprised one bit whether there's some connection with this Zimmerman dude and being some kind of not an undercover agent, but an informer, or they had him, supplied him with the weapon, or they gave him some advice on how he could go about his duties watching the neighborhood, all off the record, and say, look, and in case something happens and someone starts to come at you, you can always shoot them because you can always claim self-defense. I would not be surprised. And what's that, the city manager, I don't know his name, but he's been on, and he won't do anything until more and more pressure mounts. Now he's giving these interviews and he's being kind of complacent, and I think I believe he's part into that system. I'm not sure he'll go as high up as the mayor. The mayor's kind of, he might be a little more honest, but that city manager, I believe he's in on something going on with the chief of police, the city manager, and I mean, I'm not saying this is fact. I'm just saying I believe someone's on the take somehow, somewhere. There's definitely some, in my opinion, you know, I don't have proof. It just, you have the feeling through all the, you've been hearing about a lot of corruption in Sanford and all. Something deeper is going on. And now they're having time to all check out their stories. But hopefully this investigation brings this to a head and see how deep this goes. And then they take it a step further and find out what other laws are these Koch brothers pushing through. I mean, the NRA might push it to an extreme, but I believe in definitely the gun rights. Definitely we need to keep our gun rights, but not to the point of racist killings.